Silent Hill 2 is. That's a sentence that I've been struggling to finish since I first finished the game back in my mid-teens. Scary, horrific, thought-provoking, twisted, atmospheric, bizarre, uncanny. Well, the truth is that Silent Hill 2 is all of those things and more. So much more. It's one of my favourite games of all time, and I have a million things that I could say about it. You have no idea just how much I had to cut from this script, otherwise this video would have been 3 hours long. Silent Hill 2 is a game that has stuck with me, and will stick with me, for the rest of my life. It's the Shining of video games. A puzzle box of ambiguity and surrealism, just waiting to be decoded and opened up. It's a game that, honestly, even just getting into the mindset to even write the script for this is weird and uncomfortable. I truly believe this is a piece of media worth your time and effort to seek out and play for yourself. If you have even the slightest modicum of interest in the kind of game that I've just described to you, then I would heavily recommend that you play this game for yourself before watching the video. It is a 20-year-old game, after all. Just don't play the HD remaster, trust me. Before I continue, from this point on, there will be full spoilers for the entire game, so grab your old PS2 and play it. The first 4 Silent Hill games are all, in my opinion, genuine gold standards for psychological horror in video games. There was, and still is, nothing really like them. When the first game came out, it was unlike anything. It didn't go for traditional jump scares to scare the player, and instead it had Kafka-esque scenes that you just didn't get at the time. Scenes like this.
Harry?
Lisa, what's the matter with you?
I get it now. Why I'm still alive even though everyone else is dead. I'm not the only one who's still walking around. I'm the same as them. I just hadn't noticed it before.
Lisa.
Stay by me, Harry. Please. I'm so scared. Help me. Save me from them. Please. Harry?
Each of the original 4 Silent Hill games are incredibly effective for their own individual reasons, but it's the intimate and dreamlike horror of Silent Hill 2 that elevates the game to a whole new height of terror. This is a harrowing and disturbing story about mental illness, grief, depression, abuse, self-destruction, and most importantly, denial. It's an incredibly dark game that explores taboo subjects that most media even today would never touch. As someone who is sensitive to some of these subjects myself, maybe that's why this game stuck with me as deeply as it did. It truly is something special. A lot of this game really is up for interpretation, so you might disagree with a few things that I've said in this video if you have played the game yourself, and that's okay. It's great, even. It's the whole point of ambiguity, to spark discussion. Silent Hill 2 is a mostly standalone game that leaves the cult ordeal that Harry Mason went through in the first game to focus on a more personal and introverted story of one man visiting the town of Silent Hill, and that man is James Sunderland, our main character for this game. From the opening shot, you can tell that James is someone who is somewhat detached from reality. He drifts his hand across his face to check if he's still dreaming. He's a man with very little, if anything, to live for, and he honestly just seems off. He feels lost and confused, and his mannerisms show it. James makes his way to Silent Hill while leaving his car parked haphazardly, and with the door open too. The reason why James comes to Silent Hill in the first place is a simple one that you've probably heard before in other media. He receives a letter from his dead wife Mary telling him to meet her at Silent Hill, their special place. So James sets off to rescue his damsel in distress, battles nightmarish creatures, and saves the day in the end, right? Well, no. The truth that we find as we play through this game, and play through James's personal hell, is much more disturbing. The truth is that James Sunderland murdered his wife, Mary. She had an illness that rendered her bedridden, and James euthanized her. I mean, she was in pain. She was dying anyway, right? It was the right thing to do. Or was it? Maybe James did it because he was a young man who couldn't handle her constant need for care and her mood swings. Maybe he just wanted an out. Maybe he was just selfish. The great thing about this game is that it never explicitly tells you which of the two is the real truth. Did he do it out of love, selfishness, or both? What's interesting to me is that the letter he receives, the one that brought him to Silent Hill in the first place, is actually in his inventory the entire game, and if you look at it toward the end of the game, it's blank, leading you to question what the hell even brought him here to begin with. Was it always blank? Is he just crazy? Maybe he was looking for a punishment? Speaking of punishment, Red Pyramid, otherwise known as Pyramid Head, a now iconic villain in gaming, made his first appearance here. I've always resented that he has appeared in any game other than this one, but I understand why. His design is outstanding and it's instantly recognizable, but the reason and thematic purposes for him in Silent Hill 2 is a whole lot more interesting than just a cool design, and I feel like that's something that's been forgotten about. Pyramid Head exists as a personification of James's subconscious want for punishment. You could also very easily say that he represents James's masculinity, with his long sword being quite phallic, and the now infamous scene of him violating two leg mannequin creatures. Pyramid Head exists solely as James's personal Satan to this hell that he's in. A stronger, near invincible, more masculine and more primal version of him that gives into the animalistic needs that he has subconsciously. Which is why, at the end of the game, when James comes to terms with what he's done, Pyramid Head kills himself, his job being fulfilled as James's Punisher. In fact, every single enemy in this game is designed to be a part of James's psyche. The bobblehead nurses represent James's repressed sexual thoughts of the nurses taking care of Mary in the hospital. The lion figures representing how James saw Mary in her final days, sick and toxic, hence why it spits poison at you. And the fact that it looks like it's in a straitjacket symbolizes the confinement and uncomfort that Mary went through when she was sick. And as with almost every enemy in the game, its appearance is heavily sexualized, specifically in the legs, to show James's overarching sexual frustrations. During the course of James's journey through the town, he meets Maria, a flirtatious and sexual woman who looks almost identical to his late wife Mary. Maria is an interesting character, since her entire existence is left mostly ambiguous, and her personality seems to change violently throughout the game. One moment she can be promiscuous, and the next she will become emasculating. Sometimes she's very clingy, and other times she seems to know more about James and Mary's relationship than she ever should. Maria is an incredibly enigmatic and mysterious character, and her presence makes the game's plot that much more interesting. However, James and Maria aren't alone in Silent Hill. Over the course of the game, we get to meet a few other wandering souls searching for something in that quiet, foggy town. Two other people are visiting for their own individual reasons, and each of them are just as fascinating as James is. The first is Eddie, a young man who suffers with body image issues, specifically body dysmorphia, caused by relentless bullying of his weight for his entire life. Eventually, he snapped and murdered his bully's dog and then shot his bully in the leg using his father's gun. He fled from his town, and after that, he stumbled into Silent Hill.
Killing a person ain't no big deal. Just put the gun to their head, pow.
The other is Angela, a suicidal teenage girl who has suffered through a great amount of sexual and physical abuse from her brother and her father, who it is heavily implied she murdered. This caused her to gain a disdain and fear of men, which we can see throughout all of her scenes in the game. She came to Silent Hill because she believes that's where her mother is, who left the family early and is the only person that makes Angela's life worth living.
Oh, it's you.
There is a lot to these characters and their backstories. Honestly, I don't want to get into such complex mental issues for obvious reasons, but I did want to bring them up because these are fascinating people and important to James's overall journey in the narrative. One thing that I find interesting about these two is that it's heavily implied that the Silent Hill that they both see is different from the one James sees. We even get glimpses into both characters' worlds. Angela's final scene before she presumably ends her life comes out of nowhere and is a house that's on fire. And when James points it out to her, she says,
You see it too. For me, it's always like this.
Eddie, on the other hand, we don't see as much of, but we can assume that the cold meat locker we eventually fight him in is what his world looks like, filled with meat and people laughing at him since we see corpses all around him.
He always busted my balls. You fat, disgusting piece of shit. You make me sick. Fat ass, you're nothing but a waste of skin. You're so ugly, even your mama don't love you. Well, maybe he was right. Maybe I am nothing but a fat, disgusting piece of shit. But you know what? It doesn't matter if you're smart, dumb, ugly, pretty. It's all the same once you're dead.
And the corpse can't laugh.
Silent Hill gave these three broken people their own individual personal hell, tailored to their exact fears. One specific moment that stands out to me that I feel like I must mention involves Angela. As James descends down into the depths of Silent Hill, he encounters Angela in a pretty horrific room. It's flesh-like, filled with pistons going in and out, and I think it's pretty obvious to see the symbolism here. But what makes this scene so horrific is that it leads directly into a boss fight with the creature that's tormenting Angela, the abstract daddy. My interpretation of this enemy, which by the way is one of my favourite parts of the game, is that it's a creature that has significant meaning to both Angela and James, and I think that's why the town allows both of them to see this creature at once. For James, it symbolises his repressed sexual thoughts of his terminally ill wife, bedridden and no longer looking even human to him. For Angela, the symbolism is much more dramatic. The way that the creature is designed could be seen as two figures in a bed with one on top of the other, writhing. The lips of the creature also looking quite like a woman's genitals. It's seriously fucked up. And if you're even a little bit uncomfortable listening to this right now, then good. That's the way the game wants you to feel. The game wants to keep you on that dark, traumatic edge and never quite let you go. I talked about the different versions of Silent Hill a lot just now, so I'd like to elaborate on that. You know how usually a lazy reviewer or content creator will say something along the lines of, well, the setting is just as much of a character too, and it just never really works? Well, Silent Hill is that, but literally. The town has this almost Lovecraftian cosmic horror to it, and seemingly is sentient to a degree, with its own motivations. Its goal seems to be to become the ultimate reality check for broken people who have some kind of darkness in their heart. In a way, you could argue that Silent Hill attempts to help people by showing them their greatest fears so that they can ultimately overcome them. Even though James is the only one who ends up surviving, well, depending on the endings that you get, of course. These characters only die because Silent Hill is essentially done teaching them their lesson. No matter how hard they try, they will never be able to stop feeling remorse for what they did because they're just human beings. Just because they went through trauma doesn't justify them doing the things that they did. At least, that's how the town sees it. It's not the character's fault that they became who they are, but that doesn't erase the trauma and make it okay. In a way, you could argue that Silent Hill 2 has an underlying hopefulness to it. It's a cautionary tale about not stooping to the level of those who treat you badly, and instead becoming the person that you want to be. Back to the town itself though, since I got slightly off track there. James's journey through the town becomes more and more abstract and surreal as the game goes on. My personal favourite being the Silent Hill Historical Society, which I alluded to earlier. It starts as one building, only for James to go down a massive staircase and jump down many, many holes, leading to him descending deeper into a nightmare, only for him to use a door and walk out the back entrance of the building, as if he never went down anywhere at all. This is the type of surrealism that Silent Hill 2 goes for, and I absolutely adore it. The town seems to shift and morph on a whim, and its true motivations are ambiguous. The word uncanny is thrown around a lot nowadays, and it's almost become meaningless due to overuse. Silent Hill 2's FMVs, or full motion video cutscenes, are truly uncanny. The fact that they're on a PlayStation 2 and still look as good as they do now is incredible to me. What makes them so uncanny though is just how high quality they are. Paired with the purposefully strange and often jarring voice acting, makes the FMVs in this game so genuinely uncomfortable. There's also moments where the lighting and the camera placement is just so spot on that for a split second it genuinely looks like a recording of a real person. Then in the very next shot, a character will do a face or move in a way that just feels unnatural or unrealistic. I'm not sure how intentional this was, but it gives the game such a unnerving feeling, even when nothing's happening at all. Everyone in this game at times looks just like real people, right up until they don't. There is a reason the opening shot of the game is used in most of the thumbnails that you'll see on YouTube. It's lit in just a way that for the first second or two, it's honestly hard for your brain to even tell what you're looking at. Is this in game? A recording? An FMV? A photograph? But then when James moves his hand, he moves it just a little bit too strangely. Your brain can finally understand what it's seeing. Personally, that's something that I've never seen done before in gaming, and probably never will again. It adds so much atmosphere to the game. My favourite scene in the entire game is the conversation between James and Maria. One of them is standing behind bars, but the way that the scene is shot, it's hard to tell who, and it has that uncanniness that I was talking about. The characters look too good for a 2001 PlayStation 2 game, and yet they don't look good enough to fully be human. But yet, for a few brief seconds in the scene, you could swear that these are recordings of real people. It's a bizarre feeling that's honestly really hard to put into words. You just have to play the game for yourself.
Aren't you Maria?
I'm not your Mary.
So, you're Maria.
I am. If you want me to be.
All I want from you is an answer.
It doesn't matter who I am. I'm here for you, James. See? I'm real.
The music in this game is something I need to comment on as well. It's one of my favourite soundtracks of all time, done by the now legendary Akira Yamaoka. The first game had a great soundtrack as well, using dentist drills and other tools to create that industrial metallic sound. And Silent Hill 2 does have moments of that same industrial feel, but it evolves it into something sadder and more somber, while still keeping some of those intense tracks, this time using things like breathing on a respiratory system to create that ominous atmosphere. The music has a lo-fi, relaxing tone to it, while also still feeling slightly off and wrong, creating a soundtrack that I still listen to frequently. My personal favourite tracks in the game being the reprises of both Promise and the theme of Laura, as well as A World of Madness. Silent Hill 2's gameplay is just as abstract and obtuse as its story, and it's honestly the weakest aspect of Silent Hill 2. Granted, I personally do enjoy the gameplay, lumber and tank controls and all, but I'm someone who grew up playing games with controls like this. I can see why someone who is new to this game may dislike it. It is very player unfriendly and its controls are very clunky. The puzzles are also something which receive a fair amount of criticism that I honestly can't help but agree with. They are kind of ridiculous and a little bit too contrived for their own good. I mean, how the hell are you supposed to know that to open a metal hatch you need a horseshoe, a lighter and a wax doll? It's just a little bit too nonsensical, as opposed to the more early Resident Evil games, which have more straightforward, yet challenging brain teasers. The game has its flaws, and they mostly do come in the gameplay, in my opinion. But I don't play this game for the gameplay, I play it for the story. There are still so many things that I haven't even talked about. The red square save points, the there was a hole here room, and the entire side campaign where you play as Maria. Not to mention all of the endings of the game, with Mary's letter being one of my favourite pieces of voice acting in media. So let's go back to the start of this video. Silent Hill 2 is. I think I can finally finish that sentence now. Silent Hill 2 is many things, but to me, Silent Hill 2 is tragic. It's a tragic story of 3 lost and broken people entering the titular town and experiencing their own traumatic and darkest thoughts laid out in front of them. It's a game that gives you many questions and yet thankfully decides not to answer almost any of them. And it is one of the greatest and most provocative pieces of horror media ever created. Silent Hill 2 is a masterpiece. Thank you so much for watching this video. This is something I'm so proud of making, and I hope you enjoyed it too. What did you think about Silent Hill 2? Comment below, and stay tuned for more videos just like this one. And as always, my friends, arrivederci.